Finishing what you started. It's something that in life there are plenty of situations that you may or may not be able to do so. It could be with education or maybe even a personal goal, but it's not limited to these specifically. When it comes to consuming media, there are plenty of situations that this can apply to. Maybe you're an MCU fan and you've just fallen completely off with keeping up with the phases because of the amount of shows and movies there are and you just can't bring yourself to finish. Or maybe you're a Destiny 2 player and right at the end of this 10-year-long journey, you just can't bring yourself to finish the fight knowing the state of the game and all the drama behind it. This is no different when it comes to manga and anime. This medium is one that requires a lot of time and investment. Depending on how you perceive and engage in a story, you could be along for a ride for decades. I mean, literally, look at One Piece and Dragon Ball fans. Throughout time, however, you may not always stay with one thing, and coming off of my video discussing falling off, you may fall out of love with a series. The course of action people would expect one to take is to put the series down, or at least that is one of the options to consider. The other day, I observed a conversation in the online world that got me in my usual mode of trying to understand the different sides. The exchange was basically somebody critiquing JJK and was rebutted with the fact that regardless, that person will be back for the next chapter. Additionally, since they are still caught up after 200 plus chapters, Gege must clearly be doing something right. After some back and forth amongst multiple people, there was one question that was consistently made. That being, why would you keep up with something that you may have issues with or may not like? Clearly, if you don't like it or don't have anything positive to say, you should just drop the series and not speak on it. If you do keep reading it, then you're just miserable and instead should go read something you actually enjoy. Now this right here, in my opinion, is a slippery slope. While it may seem like there's an easy objective answer in sight, one thing people aren't considering with this conversation is the fact that personal investment can persist through the highest and lowest points within a piece of media. I mean, just look at Star Wars fans for example. One's enjoyment of a series is not set to remain consistent for the entirety of a story. At the beginning, one may absolutely love what's been presented and hypothesize on all the potential to come, only to become disappointed with the direction a story may happen to go. It's simply the nature of the game, as there are hiccups among every story across all types of media out there. Yet regardless of where you stand right now, it doesn't change the fact that the one thing people have in common more than they think is the idea that they want to see this through. Even after being disappointed time and time again, they still want to see how this story or journey that managed to captivate them for years on end wrap up, even if they aren't nearly as invested as before. Now before going any further, I don't want to pretend that it's this simple because I'm well aware of where the frustration lies. When people clearly see somebody that doesn't like the story complain or critique certain aspects of the weekly chapters, they get annoyed, maybe even angry to a certain extent. It's already bad enough that a lot of the shonen demographic conversations is pretty much a constant race to see who can lie for the sake of agenda the loudest first when it comes to slander these days. People get annoyed seeing misinformation, people get annoyed when comments that are simply not true go viral, and the last thing they want to see is quote-unquote haters talking negatively about their series each week when there is a piece of media they could go enjoy and conversate about instead. When just looking at it from this angle, I do get it. For the past few years now, I have had to be subjected to the most brutal slander and critique when it comes to my favorite things. The fan in me makes me want to go to war about it because you get tired of the same narrative being spun with different words over and over. Yet I have to ground myself and keep in mind that this may not have always been the case, and for majority of the time, this is what tends to be true. You become a fan of something when you really resonate with that said piece of media. When you're willing to talk about it openly among others and defend it in the face of negative comments, you become unspokenly validated when it comes to your takes towards the series. A lot of people who may judge harshly on certain pieces of media now were originally some of the most diehard fans of that said piece, and in that, I don't think it's fair to tell somebody to outright drop a series just because I may not want to hear what they have to say when it comes to critique or negativity. From a grounded perspective, you have to ask yourself, who am I to tell somebody else to drop a series? What authority or level of ego did I subconsciously muster up to think that somebody was really gonna sit here and listen to me yap and take me seriously? You can't gatekeep anything from anybody, and people are always going to get invested in the things that they choose to. At the end of the day, people are going to want to know how does something end after years of investment and loud reception around the world. It's because that we don't know the ending yet that human nature incites us to be curious and continue to tag along. Endings of big series are those moments where you just have to be there for, and with something like JJK for example, especially after all the recent events with Gojo versus Sukuna, who wouldn't want to keep in the loop in some form or manner to see if it was all worth it in the end? As it may look like somebody is miserable for continuing to discuss something they may not like, there is a point to be made about dedication. Not necessarily dedicated to being some hater, of course we do have those quirky individuals out there no doubt, but rather dedicated to finishing finishing what they started. It can be seen as natural if one person keeps coming back to see what the hype is about. It's almost like that series being your toxic ex that you just can't stop coming back to. You want to free yourself, but you just can't because you invested so much time that it's not always the easy walk away for good, especially when you have so much conversation about it on a weekly basis. You would have to force yourself to live under a rock just to avoid the temptation of curiosity. Yet, instead of doing all that, you can just simply keep up with it with your critique in mind. Another thing to take into account is that while the overall story might not stay one's favorite, an author can introduce a specific plot point that can carry itself into the endgame, and that alone can end up being worth the investment. A lot of people may not like My Hero Academia, but a lot of people are interested to see how the Todoroki family plotline or the All for One versus One for All plotline concludes just because of the long-term buildup. You don't have to like every single thing in a story to find some type of value to keep up with it either. Even enjoying one character out of the entire cast may be somebody's reason to come back, and in that, you are valid. There's also this giant lose-lose that comes with navigating this conversation altogether. If you continue a series but you complain, people will continue to tell you to put it down and label you a miserable individual if you continue to persist. Yet if you put it down and try to throw any form of input or critique in the future, your opinion will be invalidated because you don't keep up with it. I'm here to tell you now, there's nothing quicker that gets invalidated than when you aren't caught up to the conversation. It really comes down to the fact that this is really just how it is, and there really isn't much you can do about it. You cannot force anybody to understand your reasoning for continuing something they may dislike, as majority of the time it's just compared to somebody else's and sometimes downplayed. Even then, the anime community tends to not want to understand one another's viewpoints, hence the back and forth exchanges. Again, I'm not saying that there aren't some serious trolls out there, because there are. Plenty of individuals out there dedicate their entire online persona to downplaying or negatively discussing a series non-stop, but there is a fine line between genuine interest intertwined with critique and just outright nonsense. To bring this all to a close, I want to say that one thing you especially cannot undermine is attachment. Whether it's bitter attachment or the type you enjoy to have, for as long as there is some form of it in motion, fans will want to talk about that said thing they are attached to. Some people just want to make it to the finish line considering how much time they invested. Others want to see if their feelings could be overturned and end up liking it in the end. Many seek vindication for their agendas or complaints, for if the series were to fumble and their takes come true, then it's all worth it in the end. You could also argue that the author should be given a little bit more credit for being able to bring somebody back each week despite their frustrations with the series. When somebody really wants to step away for good, they can and will, but for those who just can't, that's how you know the author created something special. Am I miserable for playing Destiny for 10 years straight? Well, probably. But do I think somebody should be considered miserable for seeing something through to the end, even if it's about something they may not like as much as they used to? Then my answer is no. At the end of the day, all of the feelings you may experience when it comes to consuming media is just basic human emotion, and everyone expresses it in a different way. Sometimes very intensely and other times very subtle, but it all comes from a place of passion. It is okay to finish what you started despite the fact that your takes may end up as the unpopular opinion, and as long as the conversation can stay constructive and not a pure negative void of nonsense, then you have every right to see this through as much as the hardcore fan does. With that brings me to the end of this video. As always, thank you for watching, and make sure to let me know all your thoughts on this topic in the comment section down below. Stay warm out there, and I will catch you all in the next video.